Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Budish. I am the Executive Director of Transit Choices. We are a grassroots coalition advocating for a safe, efficient, reliable, multimodal, and certainly equitable public transit system for Baltimore City and the region at large. We do host monthly meetings, and we're so happy to see that many of you are joining us today for what we believe is going to be a really interactive and engaging discussion with various sort of city agencies talking about transportation. The presentation topic is the power of partnerships. And what we mean about that, what we mean also to add is the power of collaborating with one another to achieve a common goal. We are delighted to introduce our distinguished guest panelists this morning. We have Chris Ryer, who's the director of the City of Baltimore Department of Planning. We have Theo Ngongang, Deputy Director, Chief of Policy with the Baltimore City Department of Transportation. And we have Elizabeth Gordon, Director of Planning and Programming with the Maryland Transit Administration. The format for today's meeting is Jimmy Rouse and I will serve as kind of co-moderators. We have about 5 or 6 questions that we'd like to kick the conversation off with. And then, as always, we will be opening the floor to each of you for any questions, comments, or feedback that you would like to share. You may either place what you'd like to share in the chat, or you may raise your hand, and we will make every effort to speak with everyone who wishes to make a remark. With that said, good morning, our distinguished guest panelists.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see so many names and faces that I've seen in the past.
Terrific. Jimmy, would you like to begin?
Sure. So we have 6 questions prepared that we'd like to go through. They're addressed to all of you, although some of them will be more appropriate for one of you than another. But we're open to you all adding any discussion you can at any point during this questioning. And then after we've asked these 6 questions, we'd like to go to our public to get their questions and suggestions and feedback as well. So I just say as an introduction that this the idea for this meeting began when I attended a meeting at Poly to talk about the city planning agency's 10-year plan. And Theo and Liz were at that meeting along with others. And I felt the discussion was just so vital, and to see the collaboration and the dialogue between these different city agencies was inspiring to me, because that hasn't always been the case. In our 10-year history, the communication between agencies has varied. And for us as an outside advocacy organization, it's always been a goal to try to get everybody on the table together to look at our future, our transportation future, and our vision. So this conversation is a part of that, and that was its origin. So I'll begin with the first question, which I think is probably more directed to Chris, since he's the origin, the Planning Commission's the origin of the plan. But I would like to ask, what is the 10-year plan, and how does it relate to transportation?
Sure. Okay. I'll start, and Theo and Liz can chime in. So for those of you, just to maybe incite some paranoia, planners do stick together. Some of you are probably in that field and in that club. So don't be surprised that we talk, including about you, all the time. So thank you for having us. I'll kick it off with this sort of definition, what a 10-year plan is. We call it a comprehensive plan. It is, in essence, it's required by the state, has very loose or generous guidelines. Every jurisdiction now is required to produce it after the census. The date that the state requires it has floated around for years. In fact, we didn't do one after the last census. That was not the requirement at the time. We did our last one in 2006. The origins of a comp plan are in the origins of planning as a field. The Department of Planning goes back to the 30s in Baltimore, and its original mission was to guide the physical development of the city, and obviously transportation is a key element of that. So in essence, what the comp plan is for your sake is a 10-year look ahead. So you may, you saw a transition plan. Whenever a new administration comes in, there's a transition plan. This administration created their own mayoral action plan for their first term, but this is a 10-year look ahead, and really a chance to kind of dream and scheme a little bit about what you want the city to be like in 10 years. So again, its purpose is to guide physical development, but in particular related to transportation. It includes regional transit and transit equity, transit-oriented development, and freight movement. And it'll reference ongoing initiatives like our Complete Streets initiative and our proposal to figure out how to redevelop the highway to nowhere. And it will ultimately include a future land use plan that will inform a street typology that Complete Streets can use to complement existing and future land uses. So Mr. Rouse participated in we've been leading a series of outreach efforts all through 2022. We started in the spring, and we're finishing up in the fall. We created a series of about 20 position papers that the community expressed strong preference in. That's all on our website called Our Baltimore. And we'll talk a little bit later today about what specific transportation initiatives those include. So that's what the 10-year plan is. Theo or Liz, do you want to add anything?
Liz?
No, I wouldn't presume to speak about, to know more than Chris about his 10-year plan.
I might want to add the fact that in 2006, I was part of the original or the last version of the plan. So it kind of shows why this is turning gray. But clearly we have not. So we are overdue for a comprehensive look at the future of the built environment in the city. And this is a great initiative. Under the leadership of Chris, actually, a lot of things have happened because people are now paying attention to what we've said in the past, which is really like rethinking about the future of Baltimore City and how we can do it comprehensively and collaboratively. So this is probably one of the best opportunities for us to get together and get to work. So thank you.
Yeah, actually, that is something really worth highlighting is, as Chris said, these conversations have been going back since the spring. And it's really clear that Chris and his staff have been trying to make the outreach as comprehensive and as collaborative as possible. I know I've been involved in some conversations, and then, you can't walk around the office without hearing someone else mention a conversation that they've had with another person from Chris's department. So the outreach is really impressive.
If I could
Okay, well, I'd like to keep going with the second question.
Okay.
Which is, we think it's great to have you all working together. Just how do you plan to do that? Is there a formal structure? Is it informal? How do you plan to be able to work together? And how can we make this a regular occurrence into the future, even when the personalities have changed?
Well, I'll start. I mean, we hear a lot of planning fatigue when we talk to people in Baltimore. So we didn't want this effort to be in vain. We wanted it to be something that, you know, the old saying about sitting on a shelf. We didn't want it to sit on a shelf. We wanted it to be useful. So to be useful, we wanted to incorporate what other people were doing. And in this case, the two key players in the city in terms of transportation are the Department of Transportation and the Mass Transit Administration. So we're incorporating their dreams and goals and what they hope to achieve in the next 10 years into this plan, because they're the ones that are actually going to implement it, not the city planning department. As far as working together in the future, I wasn't aware that we hadn't been in the past, but certainly, I mean, planners do stick together. We tend to have similar interests. We see each other outside of the office, just like we see some of you outside the office. If we're all Baltimore based, so it's not hard to not run into each other. I'm not quite sure how to project 10 years ahead and require agencies to work together. I think that's going to be beyond my time frame, but maybe it'll be part of yours, and you can hold the planners in the next comp plan accountable for working together.
I think to add to what Chris is saying, and what he's not saying is that he actually assigned work to us. So my team is responsible for drafting some elements of the comp plan when it comes to the transportation component of it. And those elements are really based on themes. So TOD is one of the themes, and Chris might have forgotten to mention that, but we are drafting some elements of the plan, we meaning the Department of Transportation, that would be almost like, again, white papers on specific elements. So transit is one, of course, but TOD is one. The need for just creating density around transit hubs, not necessarily just transit stations, but even stations. So we are working along with Liz's team on drafting some of those pieces that eventually would find themselves into the comp plan. So and then it's it's going to become just a living document. So it will get amended over time, and it will become just part of how collaboration can look like. So that is one element. We are also doing another thing that somewhat could fit into this, which has to do with us in our priority letter, the letter that we send to Liz's boss every year in the spring. We are starting to list elements that we want to be incorporated into our vision. And some of those elements really have to do with TOD designation, which is a state process for which we provide input. So that's another avenue. So it's not really directly with Chris's team, but somewhat related, because then once the governor and MDOT secretary understand that it is a priority for us, they help us fund any ways we can get to incentivize developer to come around and build. So those are just a couple of things. Liz.
Yeah, I think something I'd add there is that at this moment, I think we have a set of working relationships on the staff level and the leadership level that is really extremely strong. We are a lot of people who have known each other a long time and worked together in various different capacities across the city at a lot of levels in our respective agencies. And so that's made the collaboration really easy and seamless. And we are taking advantage of this opportunity where you sort of have everyone's cell phone number and can just figure things out to set up some more formal collaboration points too. I mean, we have monthly and recurring calls between Theo's team and the M.MTA team at sort of the leadership level. And then there are also recurring staff conversations. And in a recent conversation with a bunch of DOT staff members, I and some members of my team were talking about how we really want to think through the really granular project opportunities and decision types where we just want to sort of write it into our standard operating procedures that, like, here's the position over at City DOT that usually has the information about this, and here's how you get in contact with them. So that as some of the personalities change over time, because people have career goals and things change, that we still have these really open lines of communication.
Well, thank you. So a lot of thought and work goes into a 10-year plan. In relation to a comment Chris made, how do we prevent it from being something that does sit on a shelf rather than actually becoming a guide for what is going to happen over the next 10 years? I'd like to get all your thoughts on that.
Mhm.
Okay, I can start again. I think that sort of the question I posed to you all, we posed to DOT and MTA, and that was sort of, where do you want to be in 10 years? When I talked to this group at the very beginning of this process back last spring, we talked about some very high level ideas. We were talking about sustainable funding for the MTA, perhaps regional funding for the MTA. You may remember I talked a lot about highway user revenue and how much money we had lost after the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, and how without a stable funding situation, whether it be for the city or for the MTA, this region and this city weren't going to progress. So now we're kind of taking a step below that. Now, I don't want to ignore what's happened in the last 9 months. We do have a new administration in Annapolis. And so it might be time, or it might be an ongoing discussion to revisit the finances of transportation in Baltimore and try to come to a point where not only is the city stable and able to take care of its infrastructure, but the transit administration can be competitive with other cities and help us keep up with Washington and Philly and Boston and New York. So now with these position papers and through ongoing work with this team here, we're starting to drill down a little bit more on the physical aspects of the plan. Theo mentioned transit-oriented development. Liz has talked a lot about that. Also, in terms of sort of roles and buckets, that seems like that's in our bucket, right? The land use planning is in our bucket, the transit or transportation's in their bucket. So we need to get together so that land use is reinforcing transportation and vice versa in the comp plan. So long and short of it is incorporating the goals of the other agencies as part of what the comp plan is all about. Trying to sort of herd the cat so that we can provide you, the citizens, with sort of a comprehensive look at where the city is going over the next 10 years. And that it's real. It's not a bunch of planners sitting in a ivory tower. It's actually practitioners that have an idea, that have a goal, that have a vision of where they want to be in 10 years, and sort of pulling all that together in the public eye.
If I may add to what Chris has stated, eventually, Jimmy, it's also going to get down to funding for the project not to sit on the shelf, or for a plan not to sit on the shelf. It has to incorporate some level of implementation phases, and implementation always comes with, along with recommendations, it comes with projects. And eventually, if we don't have the money, we don't have the money. So at every level, including for us when we are embarking upon our capital improvement program season, we are requesting funds. We are requesting funds to match federal funds that we are going after in terms of grants, and those are competitive grants, and other jurisdictions in the world do have matching funds that they always allocate to go after those federal dollars. We don't, and we're trying to get into this as a way of literally getting ourselves ready. But we will get down to funding at some point. And again, there are various sources. Chris mentioned HUR, of course, which is where we get our local dollars. But again, the long and short of it is, for a plan not to sit on the shelf, we have to find and, let's say, define a mechanism that would carry the plan into some implementation elements of it. That's my take.
Yeah, I'd say the two key pieces are sort of buy-in, and the momentum that comes with broad buy-in from the agencies that will eventually be implementing things, and also the residents and citizens that will be asking and advocating for things, the communities that will be sort of identifying those projects that Theo talked about and really driving them forward. So there's buy-in, and then there's resources. So those are the key pieces. And I think, you start with generating the buy-in. That's a necessary condition. A great way to have a plan sit on a shelf is to have it run counter to the goals of the agencies that will have to implement it, or to run counter to the desires, or not sum up the vision of the city that it's trying to represent. So I think all of this effort that Chris is putting into coordination and outreach and coalition building around it is incredibly well placed. But then once you've got the buy-in and the projects identified, yeah, it's a question of resources. As Theo pointed out, we are in a time where discretionary federal resources are available at a higher amount than before. So there's the potential for resources to be available. And I think all of our agencies are thinking about and collaborating on effective strategies to not only access those resources, but then have just the staff capacity to effectively administer and use those resources. So, yeah.
Yeah, if I could follow up on this resource theme here, and also Klaus's question in the chat, it's a perfect timing. So I think I talked to this group about how surprised I was when I took this job at how DOT's capital budget had been wiped out. Let me back up. One of the roles of the planning department is to oversee the capital budgeting process, which implements the physical construction budget of the city. So that is one way you can hold us accountable. You can see if our capital budgeting matches our comprehensive plan. But I was shocked when I took this job at how basically our DOT's capital budget had been wiped out. MTA was at such a static that they couldn't add anything without taking something else away. We're really in a bad situation financially. Klaus just asked about Penn Station. So we're not standing still. For example, the North Avenue project that was finished a couple of years ago was a big federal grant that the city didn't even have the match for that. It was like $1 million. It wasn't that big of a deal, but we didn't have the match for that, but the MTA did. And so we've also applied for Penn Station to implement as you probably know, Amtrak is only managing the station part of the project itself. It's got a private developer partner that's only managing the private side of things. So we're trying to work between DOT and MTA and implementing a complete streets strategy around it.
So I can speak to that briefly. We did win a RAISE grant recently for the multimodal access improvements to Penn Station. And we also got some congressionally designated funds for that same effort. So we're working on it and we're advancing some of the paperwork, and DOT is a really key stakeholder because, it's their right of way. So that's moving, and federal grant processes are not instantaneous. So expect some lead time, but we are working diligently through the process with FTA and FRA to make use of those funds.
So Robin, you want to go ahead and ask the last three questions?
Sure. Our next question is, in transportation planning, you need a pipeline. You need a project you're actually building, projects you are in the planning stages of creating, and engineering stages of developing. So in that vein, with the Hogan administration, this pipeline as it relates to public transportation has seemingly been wiped out. Do you all feel that the 10-year plan can restart it?
Well, I'll start. Yes, it can start it, in that it creates a 10-year look ahead, but it's not going to start up. It's not going to be the pipeline. It can start the process, the thought process behind a pipeline, but the two implementation agencies here will be creating the pipeline, hopefully that will be consistent with a comprehensive plan.
Yeah, the thing that I would say about public transit project pipeline is that the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan is MDOT-MTA's 25-year vision. So that is where we would look for the sort of long-term thinking about what we're aiming at. And then in terms of short and medium-term actions, so for the long-term plan, we're working diligently on our north-south and east-west corridor studies, which are the first two corridors to come out of the corridors of opportunity from the regional transit plan, and advancing those as quickly as we can. But those are both intended to be big transformational transit investments. So those take time, and we would expect that they would need federal funds. And so there's the federal funding process and the NEPA process. And so all that planning is rolling along. Of course, everything can't pause while we wait for those longer term projects to come to fruition. So we are, of course, doing short and medium term projects as well. In terms of short term projects, we have things like our yearly service changes where we try to match our service to rider needs. And we have the Fast Forward program, which is rider amenities that we're trying to roll out in the near term. And then we also have medium-term projects like the North Avenue Rising project that Chris referenced. That was about a 6-year grant-funded process. And then we're currently working on the East-West Raise project, which covers the CityLink blue and orange routes, and is intended to be significant transit priority initiatives and amenities on those routes. So we are doing our darndest to have things in the short, medium, and long term, improve things for our riders now and plan for the future.
And maybe one more thing to add to this is that there is an ongoing conversation, of course, about the regional, local transit authority and funding, which would not replace your organization, Liz, but would rather focus more on the Baltimore region versus the entire state. And that conversation has been initiated back days as commissioners for the regional transit plan a couple of years ago, and the conversation evolved into some House bill in last year's legislature, and it's advancing now to a level where hopefully with the working group that was created, we, meaning the region, the delegation, could present to the governor in January some level of recommendations about what exactly it would look like, or it could look like. So we hired a consultants last year to work on this. The consultants provided about 5 recommendations about what a regional local authority could look like or could be. And again, that is another part of the conversation, because it gets down to how can we focus on transit in the Baltimore region. So it's an ongoing conversation, but clearly a conversation that might become one that the next administration will carry on.
Thank you. Our next question is, in the 10-year plan, how do you prioritize what projects are going to be included?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a question in the chat about equity. I mean, equity's been a big part of a sort of a foundational building block of this plan. So we began with that strategy, and so we, I can sort of list the things we've done, but we started out trying to figure out how to reach groups and voices that hadn't been reached in the past. And we had a number of tools. We had some money, so we paid and engaged a lot of small grassroots organizations to bring in their contacts and their relationships into the planning process. One of our earlier equity strategies was to stand up the Planning Academy. The Planning Academy is targeted towards residents that aren't normally included in planning activities in the city, basically in neighborhoods that are left out or not often heard in the planning process. So we now have 250 graduates in the academy. So we engage them for outreach. We also had formed an advisory board that was selected to try to find groups of people or people that had not been reached in past planning processes. So that's what we've been doing essentially this year. And so we went out in the spring, we engaged all these groups. We essentially the 20 or so priorities that you see on our Baltimore webpage are from that effort. And then we started putting together position papers. I think Liz and Theo helped with that. On those 20 issues, we'll go back out again with you to look at those and verify those. Jimmy, I think you were part of one of those sort of sessions to form those position papers. So it'll be an iterative process, over 2 years, in and out. We go out to get information, we come back, write it up, take it back out. Is this what you said? So that's it. So we're hoping to finish all this by maybe at the earliest this time next year, maybe a little bit longer. So we have time yet. And we haven't even really started yet on the physical development plan.
Theo or Liz, did you want to add anything to Chris's comments?
No. Chris is on point.
Well, Chris, our last question had to do with how does the 10-year plan achieve transit equity? And I believe you touched on that, talking about that is the lens through which, this plan is being developed. We do know that our mayor, Brandon Scott, has been very, very vocal about public transportation projects and initiatives, all of which need to be looked at through an equity lens. So we're very pleased to hear that is sort of the foundation upon which, a lot of these conversations are held and a lot of the planning is done.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note it feels like the city, the state, and the federal government agendas are all lining up here. I don't think this is, at least in the short term, this will be a heavy lift. I think we're all kind of on the same page here and able to work together towards the same goal.
That's great to hear. Thank you. At this stage of our meeting, what we'd like to do is to open it up to each of our meeting attendees for any questions, comments, or feedback that they would like to share with everyone. You may do that by either raising your hand or by putting a comment in the chat. I'm seeing Klaus, did you want to share any comments with the group?
Yes. So we talk, of course, about the long range issues, and the long range questions on DOT side had to do with a long range transportation plan that was started under the previous director. Now this director has left. So one of the questions is, Liz pointed to the staff capacity that the agencies need to have to implement things. What the situation is at DOT. Chris had pointed out, they were financially decapitated, but now they are also literally decapitated. So I'm wondering whether we can learn a bit more about the state of affairs at DOT. I think they lost their bike planner and all kinds of things. So maybe we can get an update there.
Unfortunately, Klaus, I'm not sure what kind of update you'll be looking for. We are extensively looking to replace positions that are currently vacant. We have a new interim director in a person of Corinne Johnson, who was and still is at least the deputy director, the chief engineer, and also the overarching manager for Complete Street. As a deputy director, she has ascended to the interim director's position. And for all the other positions that have recently been vacated, we are actively looking for replacement. If you know anyone or if you'd like to come and join us, that would be fantastic. But we are struggling with finding the best way to keep building capacity and getting ready for even when we get federal dollars.
Yeah, I'll add a commercial to Theo's commercial. During COVID, our planning department, like most, because I do talk to other planning directors, almost all of us experienced 25 or 30% turnover during COVID. And right now, I think we have a couple of positions in sustainability. We have a community planner position. We have a communication position that will help with this comp plan. So if anyone knows anyone interested in coming to work for the Baltimore Planning Department, we can show you how to get through. You got to get through the city HR system. It's a little daunting, but we can coach you on that. So
we too are hiring. No, it's a real issue at this time at every level of every agency, finding and retaining the right people. I think we're making real strides on it here at M.MTA. And I know that Theo's working hard, and I know Chris and his team are working hard to do that as well. It's one of those things where it reminds you that the details really matter, the details of supporting your staff, doing what you can do to make it a good working environment, and retain people is key over time to building the capacity and implementing the big vision. So even as the big vision is being formed, I don't think any of us are losing sight of the day-to-day staff capacity building questions.
Thank you. Ms. Kirshner, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, good morning. This is Samia Kirkner from Morgan State University, and I have two questions. One related to which I put in the chat, how the residents were involved is very clear because of the Planning Academy. That pool of informed community voices are definitely happening, and also the advisory board. How is the Baltimore Coalition for Transit Equity involved in this conversation? And my second question is, team of advisory is one thing, but identifying anchor institutions that can actually support the community engagement piece with trained professionals. How are anchor institutions identified, or are they identified, or will they be identified so that you can build the capacity further to the staff members only?
I can start. I can't answer the question specific about the coalition, but I will say we'd be willing to talk to anchor institutions. We have not engaged them in our outreach. Specifically, we have focused on very small grassroots organizations, about 20 of them that we found funding for to enable them to do some work in the neighborhoods or coalitions that they're a member of. That we thought that was our most direct way to involve citizens that had not been involved in the past. But if you all have some ideas, I'd be happy to talk to you.
Yes, definitely. I think that the issue with directly the planning department or the DOT directly dealing with residents is that if the residents do not have the capacity, the professional skills, then you all are guiding the conversation. You need to engage, mediating non-partisan parties with professional skills to mediate between your departments and the city residents. And specifically representing Morgan State University, I'm not doing that in this meeting, but speaking of Morgan State University, our 200 years of capacity building and trained professionals is an ideal anchor institute for you to engage in mediating between your department and the city residents in a way that does not manipulate the residents.
Thank you for that. We're not trying to manipulate residents. I will say that.
No, I'm not saying that
happy
you are. I'm not saying that you are at all. Please don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is that when the residents don't have the professional skills, then unwittingly they are being manipulated, even if it's not your intention. That's what I'm saying.
Understood.
Okay. Part of the idea behind the academy is to provide that education and that sort of window. It's not intended to provide a window into all of city government or even specifically into transportation, but it should be a way for people to get into the planning world and ask questions and sort of figure out who does what and how they can have influence.
Thank you. We are going to move on to some questions that we have in the chat. This comes from John. He asks, what what's one thing new or different you're excited about that's come to the forefront in conversations with the public or agencies that is new or different from the last comp plan?
Chris, you wanna?
Sorry, yeah, could you repeat that question? I didn't see it.
Sure. What's one thing new or different you're excited about that's come to the forefront in conversations with the public / agencies that is new or different from the last comp plan?
Oh, that's a tough one. Not sure I can answer it yet. I'm not party to all the comments and ideas and position papers that we have put together yet. I would be able to answer that a lot better a month or two from now.
What we will do at the conclusion of this meeting, this is to our panelists, is we'll send you all of the comments in the chat, and you can get back to us with any questions or comments or follow up. The next question is, or comment, a critical part of a comprehensive plan for Baltimore is making the most of the Greenway Trails network, which could have such positive impact, connecting neighborhoods, providing amenities and development opportunities. How is this effort being integrated? And can you speak to, bear with me one second, to make real progress on this?
I can start and then hand it to Theo. I mean, there are a couple different questions here. The first is, how's the Greenway Trail system integrated into the comp plan? I mean, it's an existing concept and plan, and we would incorporate it into the comp plan as we would all existing plans. That said, we're really much more in an implementation phase now with the Greenway Trail. We've sort of all divvied up the work. Our role in the planning department is to try to figure out, which we are actively in the middle of, how to fund the last acquisition piece. There's a big chunk of railroad property we have to buy, and we have to figure out how to pay for that. And there's also an agreement that's been developed, hasn't been signed yet, but it's been developed with Baltimore Gas and Electric for the sort of final connecting piece between the railroad and BG&E. We would actually control all the property necessary for the Green Network Plan. And transportation's moving ahead with a section that is in the right of way and in an active planning process for that particular section. There are also other pieces going where it goes through private property and the developer is willing to pay for the improvements. We're putting together design guidelines for those sections. And if you're following all the work around the middle branch, there's sort of an addendum now to the Green Network Plan that involves the middle branch and a loop around that. There's been a lot of discussion with it. It hasn't been to the Planning Commission yet. It probably will go in January or February, but it's nearing completion of the planning process. So multiple things going on. Theo can speak maybe specifically to the design section they're working on now, which I believe is the northern piece.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Yes, we are actively working on moving the design elements of the northern sections of the Greenway Network trails. It's not quite a part of a comprehensive plan from a planning standpoint. It's really more of let's say, city initiative for which we at DOT have received some state dollars to really complete the missing segments of it within the northern portion of the trail. So roughly trying to connect, if I go to the north and southwest, Lakewood Park, all the way up to 33rd Street and down to Lake Montebello and further south. That's kind of the segment that is in the working stages right now. The goal is to really spend the money that we got, of course, and we have a team dedicated to this, but the goal is also just to work with the community and the communities, and to make sure that they don't see this as something that we impose on them. Literally, we have been labeled in the past as an agency that actually just does what the city or the residents don't need. So part of our job, along with the technical aspect of actually drawing this and bringing this to about 30% design in the next year, part of the issues that we are dealing with right now is really making sure that we are doing what the residents want. And as you all know, one resident might like this and the next one next door might not like it. So there's also some sort of a very careful approach to public engagement that we are trying to, that we are currently undergoing. So it's a combination, not just of public meetings, but it's also a combination of us going to the residents in their own turf and making sure that we understand where they think this project should go in terms of reaching completion. In the meantime, we are also working with 2 consulting firms among the best in town to really address and move the design elements of it. So we have initiated a series of public engagement meetings back in the spring of this year. We are a little bit slow to get back to the public, but it's in the plan. We should be getting back out with some sort of a number one, what we've heard, because we did a lot of surveys. We spoke to a lot of residents and a lot of, let's say, advocates or advocacy groups. We did a lot of talking. We did a lot of listening. We got to come back out and also show that there is progress in the design aspect of this. So more to come soon.
Thank you. I see a gentleman with his hand raised.
That's me. It's David Ben.
Hi, David. Good morning.
How are you?
Good,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah, I'm glad you could answer the question, and that people are trying to keep moving ahead on the loop portion of the Greenways Trail Network. I'm curious, are we able to keep working on the network part of it, which was, as I understood, and Tom Stoser started this years ago, for the kind of east-west and north-south streets through the city that were picked out that could in fact link to the loop, but really began to connect neighborhoods with their schools and their rec centers and their parks up to this loop as well. So it was like an idea of a green kind of complete streets that would link to the loop. And I know we're having struggles just getting the loop continuing to move, and that I'm glad to see it's moving. But can you speak to the network part that links up to the loop?
Chris.
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, the reality of the Green Network Plan is that the total amount of funding for it was $5 million. That's all that's ever been allocated. And I earlier spoke about the problems DOT is having with the HUR fund. So I'm going to be really blunt here. Somebody said, hopefully, the new administration in Annapolis. Well, it's not hopefully. We need you all to be engaged in lobbying for these things. That's why we're here today. So as far as the Green Network Plan goes, it's hampered by resources. It's tremendously hampered by resources. We took the this was like one of the first things I did when I started. We took the $5 million we had and we spent it. We spent it on several open space projects that we know we can complete, and we are doing that. And we're spending it on the acquisition that we need to acquire to complete the loop. Now, DOT has finally gotten a little bit of their capital budget back. It really doesn't impact them this year. It will impact them next year and the following year. And then it's over. So unless the new administration makes that change a permanent change, this green network plan won't be built. I'll be really honest, unless somebody in the federal government waves $25 million into our budget that can only be used for this. And frankly, if we had $25 million, there's about 10 priorities in front of the green network trail right now. So we have to get on stable financial footing before we can take on some of these really important projects. And that's what I was talking about last spring. That's why the HUR funds are so important. That's why regional funding for the MTA is so important. We're like in a flatline situation. We're not in a growth situation. And so when you're not in a growth situation, you're either in a maintenance situation or you've got to take something away to add something. So we've got to get in a growth situation, and we need you all participating in the sort of public arena with our state delegation and the new administration, saying that transportation funding in the city is important, because we can't do it alone.
Thank you, Chris. So we have about 1 or 2 minutes left, since we started a couple of minutes late this morning. Jonathan, I'm going to get to you in a moment, but there are 2 questions in the chat. If we could respond to those, that would be great. One question is, in what ways do you anticipate your agency strengthening partnerships with the state's new administration?
Should we let Liz do that first? I don't know.
Sure.
I can, she has the most.
We are a state agency, right? So we don't have partnerships with state agencies. We are a state agency. So at this moment, we work for this administration, and when there's a new administration, we will work for that administration.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you all of you for sharing and answering some good questions. This question is for Chris. In the Baltimore, community engagement process, which I've been involved in terms of attending some of the workshops and have been really impressed by how they've been run. But I'm curious, how has the plan directly engaged transit riders in the development of the plan?
Good question. That's a very good question. I don't think we have. I do, if we want to go way back, some of you may remember this, but back in the 90s, Ralph Moore and I, we co-chaired the CPHA Transportation Committee. And we were able to, at CPHA, engage a group of high school students during the summers to ride the buses and interview riders. And I think we produced a report card at the time that really talked about what the riders' issues were. And we haven't been able to do that through this process. I don't know, I'm sure MTA does regular polling of its ridership, but I'm not familiar with what that is. But
Jonathan specifically does regular contact with our ridership.
Yeah, to out myself, I work for Liz in the Office of Planning, and so I've been doing a lot of talking to transit riders as well as organizing our pop-ups. And so I think I would just offer, we would love to collaborate. We would love to share maybe some of what we've learned in terms of the best ways to engage transit riders. As you all continue in the plan.
Great.
Thank you. Our last comment question is related to ADA compliance with all planning, as MDOT, MTA, and Baltimore City Dot have not really been compliant for deaf and hard of hearing transit riders.
I can jump in.
Liz?
Please go ahead, Theo.
I'm sorry, Liz. I am probably not revealing a secret here by saying that we at DOT have put together an ADA division, literally from scratch, based on a lot of issues happening, and of course the fact that a lot of our sidewalks are not ADA compliant. This is just news. It's the way we've been at the business here. So we are actively looking at we are hiring. It's a small team that is tasked with really starting with an asset management basis of really looking at our complete assets and how much compliant they are with ADA, and specifically focusing on transit and the at the transit hubs, and at pretty much at every transit shelter that we can find that is not ADA compliant. So there is already some sort of a inventory process in the works. Again, we are also bringing capacity. We've hired 5 engineers that are specifically dedicated to ADA compliance in our right-of-ways, including sidewalks and including shelters for bus transit. So this is an ongoing effort. We also are working with MTA to make sure that our lists kind of like are matching, and stay tuned, but it's clearly in the works.
Thank you.
For our part, we do maintain every effort to always be in compliance with ADA. And even all of that said, for deaf and hard of hearing transit riders, I know it can be incredibly challenging to get the information that's needed about stops and stations and things like that. We are constantly trying to upgrade the signage and the real-time information that's visibly available in all of our transit vehicles, and at as many of our stops and stations as possible. And there are, breakdowns, maintenance issues, errors, things that happen, but it is something that's a really high priority and that we're always working on addressing. And we do have many ways to get in contact to raise ADA issues like that to us to make sure that we can address it.
Well, thank you all. Jimmy is going to provide the closing remarks.
So first of all, I want to thank Liz and Theo and Chris for participating in this. There's clearly a lot of interest. There's a lot of comments in the chat room, which we will send to all of you. But it just shows that there's a high degree of interest from the public in communicating with you all. I would love to get you back at some point to talk about whatever issues are in the chat room and whatever comes up maybe in 3 to 6 months. It strikes me as a layperson who's been advocating for public transit for 10 years now, how difficult it is to get things done. And I feel like we have a good group here to address the issues in front of us that keep us from getting things done. Plus, we have a new administration at the state level who's we've been working directly with Wes, and he's very transportation oriented. So, and then we have federal dollars available. So there seems to me to be a real opportunity here for us working together to come up with a plan and a vision and implement it. And you all are key, Chris and Theo and Liz and Holly are key to helping us figure out how to get things done. So I want to thank you all you all impressed me with how hard you work and how dedicated you are. And I'm constantly impressed by people at MTA and City Dot. I haven't had much association with the planning department, but I was very impressed by the person who moderated that session at Poly. He was tremendous. So let's work together. Let's bring this conversation back in a few months. And thank you. It's been wonderful hearing what you all have to say.
And may I just add briefly, we want to extend a thanks to each of you that are meeting participants that have taken time out of your day to join us. You know, as Jimmy and I often say, you know, this would not be possible without your ongoing interest and support. And to our wonderful panelists, please reach out to Transit Choices for any support that you need to move the transit agenda forward. You know, that is our mission. That is something that we're more than happy to be involved with. And we look forward to hearing from you. So we wish you all a wonderful day, a very happy Thanksgiving, and details regarding our December meeting will be announced very shortly. Thank you.
Great,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.